All right, it is 2 o'clock. So with that, welcome to Performance Task, putting learning into action. So if you haven't joined one of our webinars before, hang on. It's going to be the quickest 30-minute professional development webinar you've attended. Also, don't forget to grab your smartphone as we will have a couple of QR codes to scan. And these webinars rely on participant interaction to be successful. So get ready to share in the chat box, share with the reaction buttons. We're going to go to Padlet, which is an EdTech tool today. So get ready. Here we go. So let's ponder this first. And if you want to make a note on a Word document or a note app, or if you just want to scratch down some thoughts on a piece of paper that's nearby, that's fine as well. Think about this. What if students could show their understanding of a complex topic by creating a project or product, solving a real-world problem, or conducting an experiment? Write down some things that come to mind as you hear that question. Like I said, it can be an app that you're using to track your notes. It can be on a scratch piece of paper nearby, a Post-it note. Write down your thoughts or your response to this question. What if students could show their understanding of a complex topic by creating a product, solving a real-world problem, or conducting an experiment? Okay, you have your thought written down somewhere? Keep that thought in the back of your head. We're going to come back to it. So like I said, my name is Mandy Green. Work with at GW over with professional services. These are our 3 big learning outcomes from today. We're going to look at defining performance task, looking at some key elements of performance task design, and then of course looking at some of those rubrics that we'll use to assess the performance task. So hang on, let's get started. All right, so here's your first chance to participate and learn with and from everyone on the call today. Define performance task. So you're going to type your response in the chat box. How do you define performance task? I'll give you just a couple of minutes to get your response in that chat box. While you're typing, these are some things that come to my mind, right? So these are some kind of complex task. They're solving problems. That might be something I would put in the chat box. So how do you define performance task? Let's check the chat box and see some responses that are coming in. I hear one that says, I cannot hear you. If you can hear me, if you'll just give me a thumbs up or let me know. We'll check some mics. David talks about how they are projects. Yes. If you can't hear me, you might want to check the settings under the microphone, the speakers, or you could leave and rejoin. Sometimes that helps me with Microsoft Teams. It's just to leave the webinar or meeting and join back in. Let's see, Julie's talking about common ways to assess performance in foods classes and culinary. Yes, Michelle's talking about tasks that are hands-on, psychomotor skills for her content area. Alan's talking about being able to complete a certain task on a vehicle like an R&R spark plugs. So these are some of your definitions of performance task, right? Joseph's talking about a live demonstration of the acquired skills or knowledge. Absolutely. Like Mo's talking about a sample drawing in class. Robert's talking about student learning outcomes are greater. They can't achieve the student learning outcome per the rubric, right? Jason's talking about ways to demonstrate understanding of the physical components of the curriculum. Stephen's talking about completing a hands-on. George is talking about repeatable and possibly multi-step kind of project or process. Absolutely. So these are all ways that we can define performance task. So when we think about putting all these definitions together and some of the common words, these really are like a complex task that can require students to apply their knowledge and skills to create some type of product or solve a problem. Oftentimes, these performance tasks involve multiple steps, like was mentioned in the chat. They require critical thinking skills and even creativity, right? So these performance tasks are a type of assessment that measures students' ability to perform real-world tasks. So these tasks go beyond the memorization and they focus on applying their learning in an authentic context. So a learning activity that engages students in active learning, problem solving, performance tasks can also provide opportunities for students to practice or demonstrate their understanding, right? It's really an assessment that allows students to showcase their learning in a diverse way. And it can take various forms that was mentioned in the chat, right? Projects, products, presentations, experiments, and even performances. So we're going to go with all of that as kind of our collective definition of a performance task for today's purposes. So when we think about performance tasks, how are these different from the assessments that we've talked about over the course of the last 4 weeks? So we can kind of picture this with 5 different elements that show the differences. So let's talk about focus. Performance tasks, they focus on real-world application, critical thinking, problem solving. Whereas some of our more traditional assessments often focus on memorization and recall of facts. Then we can think about the format. Like was mentioned in the chat, the performance task can have various formats, projects, presentations, experiments. But usually a more traditional assessment is going to have multiple choice, fill in the blank, short answer, sentence completion, true, false. Then we can think about it from kind of an evaluation perspective, right? We evaluate performance tasks using rubrics where we assess quality of work, creativity, and maybe even the process. Whereas traditional assessments are going to look at those, they're usually graded, they're based on a correct answer or specific criteria. We can also look at student engagement. Performance tasks are usually more engaging because they allow students to be creative and to apply their knowledge. Whereas traditional assessments can be less engaging because they might have students, we might have students who prefer hands-on, and they might just be either taking a test, pencil and paper, or on a computer. And then we can think of this as the assessment of learning. So when we first talked about formative assessments, I briefly mentioned that there are 3 areas of this. So assessment for learning, which was our formative assessments, assessment as learning, and now this falls under the assessments of learning. So the prepositions are of, as, and for. And so these have a deeper understanding. Students can show that, they can show how they apply their skills, whereas traditional assessments, they might just assess basic skill and knowledge. So overall, performance assessments or tasks, they offer a more comprehensive view and provide an authentic assessments for students to showcase their learning. All right, so now we kind of have some differentiation going on between traditional assessments and performance tasks. Here's the first time you can use your reaction button. So thinking about what we just talked about, can you define and differentiate performance tasks from traditional assessments? If so, find the react button and give us a thumbs up. So can you differentiate and define performance tasks from other traditional assessments? I see a couple of thumbs up. Yeah, it's great. All right. Let's keep rolling. So now that we have defined and sort of differentiated performance tasks from traditional assessments, let's start layering on top of that elements to design performance task. So there's some key areas. So performance tasks, as we know, are designed to mirror real world situations, right? That makes them more authentic and engaging. Also, by providing these tasks that require critical thinking and problem solving skills, we as teachers and educators can challenge our students to apply their knowledge in more meaningful ways, right? So to ensure that our students understand the expectations, we also provide clear and concise instructions that are crucial. So a well-defined prompt and guidelines really help our students focus their efforts and produce high quality work. So all that being said, the 3 main elements of design are authenticity, complexity, and clarity. So get ready for your chance to jump in. I'm going to share a QR code in just a moment. On that, it's going to lead you to Padlet, which is an ed tech tool. We're using the free version today. What you see on the screen is what the Padlet will look like. It has 3 columns for the design elements of performance task. It's going to have authenticity, complexity, and clarity. And there is a question or a prompt, as you can see, that is under each of those columns. So once you get there, you're going to click on the plus sign underneath the column heading, and that will allow you to insert your response to the question. So for example, the authenticity question is how can performance tasks be designed to mirror real world situations? So you're just going to put your comment in that column. If you want to do the complexity one, you can click here, and clarity. Because these webinars are only 30 minutes and they move quite quickly, I would love for you to do 2. If you have time, we'll do 3. Okay, are you ready? So here's the QR code that will take you to the Padlet. I'm also going to throw the link in the chat so that it will be easy to find there so that you can use it on your mobile device or you can jump on the Padlet one. When you get there, like I said, you'll click on the plus sign to answer your response to the question or prompt in each column. The goal is to complete 2 columns, 3 if you move quickly. I'll give you just a moment to scan that QR code. Click on the link. Like I said, we are using Padlet. It is a free ed tech tool, but as always, check with your organizational IT department to make sure that you can use it with students on your network. All right, with that, I'm going to jump over to our Padlet so that we all can see what's going on. So as you can see at the top, when you are using Padlet, it is a collaborative whiteboard tool. There are little, I call them little bugs at the top, and I can tell how many people are actively typing and interacting with the Padlet. So we have a few that are just getting started here. Their responses will be popping up momentarily. So let's see what we think about the performance task key elements of design: authenticity, complexity, and clarity. Let's see some of your responses, and you can even provide examples if you'd like. So some of the first ones coming in with the authenticity column. So how can we design these tasks to mirror real world situations? So some of the responses are simple projects that cover the task they would do. Absolutely. In an HVAC lab, students can install an actual furnace, right? That's a performance task. Design them to mimic or mirror real world items. So the capstone class presentation to sell construction services. Yeah, and there's also one about role playing that's just coming in. Awesome. So keep typing in authenticity if you want to. I'm going to move on to complexity. So when we think about complexity with designing performance tasks, we're thinking about tasks that challenge our students to think critically and to solve problems. So some ways that we can do this is design basic documentation. So based on Bloom's taxonomy, students can perform to the extent. Also, troubleshooting an actual piece of HVACR equipment. Exactly, that's under complexity. Okay, refer to Bloom's taxonomy for higher level verbs. Yep. All right, keep typing under complexity if you're working on that. I'm going to jump to clarity. So when we think about clarity in our performance tasks that we design, how can we ensure that our instructions and even our feedback are clear and concise? So some thoughts coming in from the colleagues here on the call today are rubrics, being specific about expected outcomes. Another one about rubrics, checkpoints involved in the project. Absolutely. I feel like that one is left out a lot of times, but having certain checkpoints or check-ins throughout the project can be helpful as well. So as you can see, there are many responses coming in under all of the columns for the design elements. So as long as you have a link to this, you'll have a link to this and all the feedback so that we can learn with and from everyone on the call today. So this is there for you. Hopefully you can take away some ideas that will help improve performance tasks at your organization. All right, let's jump back over here for a moment. Now, here's one more chance to use the reaction button. So now after learning with and from each other about the key elements of a performance task, can you identify your key elements for effective performance task design? Stephen has a thumbs up. Find those react buttons. Give us a thumbs up if you can do this. This is just a quick formative assessment. I'm seeing a few other thumbs up coming in on the reaction button. Thanks for jumping in. All right. So now that we have defined performance task, we've differentiated it between that and traditional assessments. We then looked at some design elements. So as we are creating a performance task for our students, some elements of design to consider. Let's break that down and let's look at the rubric piece. So now that we've designed a performance task and we've looked at authenticity, complexity, and clarity, let's think about how then we're going to create that rubric that helps assess, evaluate the performance task, but also provides feedback. So the first thing we're going to think about is identifying the criteria, right? We have to break down that task. So what specific skill or knowledge should our students be demonstrating? During this stage, we're also considering our learning outcome. Like, what are the key goals of this performance task? So examples of this criteria could be content knowledge, critical thinking, communication skills, use of resources, organization, etc. Once we have identified the criteria of the performance task, we're then going to develop performance levels. So we're going to create some type of rating scale, which determines the number of performance levels. So it could be a 4-point scale, where maybe a 4 is exceeds expectations. A 3 would be meet expectations. A 2 would be approaching expectations, and a 1 would be below expectations. Whatever it is, you can create the rating scale. For each of those levels, then, you provide a clear description of what the student work looks like. So once we have identified the criteria, we've developed a performance levels with the rating scale. Then we create the table, right? So this is just organizing the criteria. You list the criteria, maybe as column headings. You list the performance levels. It could be listed as rows, and then you fill in each cell that describes specific behaviors or qualities associated within each criterion and performance level. So we've identified the criteria, developed performance levels, and we've put them together in a rubric table. Then sometimes we can involve the students. Students can co-create the rubric. So involving students in the development process can increase ownership and understanding of the rubric. It also helps us use more student-friendly language that makes it easier for students to understand the rubric. So here are just a few best practices with rubrics, right? So share the rubric with students before the task. It helps students understand the expectations and they can start to self-assess their work. We provide that specific feedback. So using the rubric to provide detailed feedback on the student performance. We can incorporate that student self-assessment. It encourages students to use the rubric and evaluate their own work. And I have found in my experience that when I do that, my students are more harsh on themselves than I ever would have been as the instructor. Then finally, we're going to review and revise rubrics regularly because we know things change. All right, so thinking about the quick rundown of rubrics, can you develop clear and specific rubrics to evaluate student performance on these complex tasks? If so, give us a thumbs up. Let's see your reaction buttons. Oh, I see a couple coming in. All right. So once again, just a quick formative assessment that we wrap into here. Now let's start to put all this together. So in the chat, you're going to complete the sentence stem. The sentence stem says, I used to think, and you're going to fill in the blank, about performance task. Now I know blank about the performance task. So take a couple of seconds, think about your response, and then type this sentence stem with your response added to it into the chat box so that we can share and learn with and from each other. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to get your thought together about what you used to think about performance tasks versus what you now know about performance tasks from today's webinar in the last 21 minutes. Oh, so Gail, I see one coming in. So I used to think a lot about performance tasks. Now I know even more about performance tasks. That works, absolutely. George is saying I used to think very little. Now I know a whole lot more. Awesome. Did you learn anything specific that was surprising to you today? I would love to hear that as well. Or something you hadn't considered before. Let's get a few more of these in the chat as we're wrapping up and starting to reflect. I used to think, but now I know. It's basically the sentence structure. When you're ready, type that in the chat. Let's see what some responses are. Oh yeah, George, that shocked me how many people are saying blooms and the rubrics and the responses. Absolutely. All right, let's get a couple more in the chats. Yep, Davis is coming in. All right. Yeah, Robert's saying I used to think a little about performance tasks. Now I know more about performance tasks, specifically about designing and producing them. Absolutely. All right, let's keep moving for the sake of time today. If you want to keep typing them in the chat, that's perfectly fine as well. All right, so as you know, I'll put all the links to the chat in just a moment, but you can't scan this QR code. There is a blank template in there for a certificate of attendance for today's session. So don't forget that if you need that. Also, these are posted in our YouTube playlist for GW. And so you can catch the recording usually by the end of the week. They're on the YouTube playlist. While you're on our YouTube page, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you'll be notified when new office hour webinars are added. The screen will not go. There it goes. And then, as always, at GW, we are always looking for feedback and ways to make these better. So leave us some feedback. We'd love to hear your thoughts about today's session. Also, this wraps up our last office hour webinar for the 2024 calendar year. So be on the lookout for some information coming about the 2025 office hour webinars. We'll be sending an email. It'll be on our social media probably. You will find out about it. Don't worry. We would like to thank you for attending and participating in all of our 2024 office hour webinars. We hope there's some things that help you fine-tune the craft and art of teaching. And with that, we're going to say thanks for being with us. Have a great Christmas and a great holiday season, and we'll see you in 2025.